I think people are like, well, the IFU doesn't say we use a flush pump, but that doesn't mean you can't do better than the IFU. And I think people get really lost in that the IFU doesn't say you can do this. You're right. You can exceed the IFU. You can do better than the IFU. You can't go under the IFU.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Welcome back to the Beyond Clean podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Parker, and today we are talking about in-planet decontamination, the great disassembly debate. How many of those instruments ought to come apart? Do you have one of those employees in your department who just seems to invent ways to take apart every instrument in your inventory? This episode goes out to them. Joining me in studio today is Hank Balch as we dive into this topic. Hank, welcome to the studio.
I'm excited to be here, Bobby. Thank you for the very generous invite to come on the podcast today and talk about this is one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart, so critical to the goal of sterile processing to get our instruments clean prior to that sterilization process, and then obviously to keep them sterile into the OR. But if we don't get this right, nothing else matters.
That is right. And so as we're diving into this, we've invited into studio with us today a special guest, Arlene Bush, who's going to be talking about decontamination workflows from her long tenure working in the sterile processing industry. And she's got some news to share with us about her new role in the industry. So that's a little teaser for you. We will be right back with Arlene Bush.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
And joining us now in studio is Arlene Bush, HSPA President and the Communications Director for the Florida HSPA Chapter Fire. Arlene, welcome to the studio. Good to talk to you again.
Hi, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you guys having me on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hank and I were talking about this decontamination topic of assembling instruments in Decontam and know a little bit about what you've done in your department's history and kind of the organizational workflow there. So we're excited to talk with you about that. Before we dive into the topic today, Arlene, you've been a longtime friend of the show. We've talked with you on a number of occasions. In fact, I think your most recent conversation with us was actually on the Pathogens and PPE show, episode 11 with Jill Holdsworth. So definitely a long history there for people to go back and listen to. But for those who aren't familiar with you, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction? What have you been doing the last several years in the sterile processing space? And what connection do you have to this decontamination topic today?
Most recent, currently I work for the West Palm Beach VA, but prior to that worked for Lee County VA, and prior to that I worked for Advent Health Orlando, which was a large system education position. I've worked in the trenches. I've worked at large healthcare systems, small healthcare systems, all up and down the East Coast, as well as Hawaii Pacific Health out in Hawaii, which is a fairly large healthcare system there. You know, whirlwind career in sterile processing. This is year 26 for me. You know, I'm a lifer. I'm in it to win it. But I can't stress enough the importance of what we do. So many people don't get to see what we do. We're that department that, you know, may not have a sign from the hallway, but we're sort of a department within a department. As you remember previously, we were connected with materials, so we were a department within a department. But now we're kind of branching out The more awareness we bring to our profession, the better off our profession is. And it starts with us, right? Any awareness we can get out with social media, podcasts, meetings, chapter meetings where you can be in the room, conferences. It is really a great opportunity to hone your skills as a sterile processing professional because you can't get all your education within the department. So I really feel like that's a great way to kind of network as well.
Yeah, it's a big world out there. That's obviously, we would agree with that sentiment. That's why we need to be involved in conferences, podcasts, things like that. It's why when you read your HSPA CRCST chapter, they talk about all kinds of things that you maybe don't do in your department because certifying for an industry, everybody does things a little bit differently. So definitely some value in that. One other thing that I want to highlight in that introduction, Arlene, I kind of casually brushed over that HSPA president title, but I want to say congrats as you're 26 years in strong, still growing, in it to win it, as you said. So congrats on that new title. Anything that you'd want to say to the listeners out there who are maybe just getting started in sterile processing and wanting to maybe make a career out of this and maybe be HSPA president someday?
Well, anybody can be me. As long as you are an active member, you can nominate yourself to be president. But really, I feel like anybody who wants to sit in the president seat for the association, it's not just a title. It's not. You really have to be steadfast in the industry, stay up on latest and greatest topics, products, outbreaks, things of that nature. But I feel like any one of our active members could potentially sit in the presidency seat. So don't feel like you can't do this because it could be you. But definitely get involved. Maybe sit on a committee first, learn the inner workings of the association, and align your values with the mission, vision, and values of the association. And you'll be set on a career path to be sitting in the seat I'm sitting in for sure. I mean, it's very possible.
Yeah, that's what I've always loved about the sterile processing industry. It's so much more than just an entry-level job, although it gets treated as such in many hospitals, unfortunately. There's so many different ways to grow, so many different directions to head. And so, yeah, just it's great talking to yet another example of somebody who's stuck with it, found a tremendous way to grow their career in the industry. So we're excited to be talking to you today, Arlene. With that introduction, why don't we turn the corner and our attention towards decontamination? This season, we are talking through all topics of decontamination. And today, it's that piece of trying to get our instruments from the manual cleaning process, which we talked about sink workflows on a previous episode, into the washer disinfectors. So we've titled it Peace Out, Undone, the Great Decon Disassembly Debate. So Arlene, why don't you walk us into a little bit of an intro here as we are training technicians about how to do decontamination process. Talk us through that process between our manual cleaning and our washer disinfectors about what needs to be disassembled and why that's important to the workflow.
So this has been a huge topic, right? When you start training, do you start in decontam? You do, because that's where the process starts.
Well, welcome to work. Here's your PPE for the next 2 weeks. You're sweating in here with Arlene.
If you want to do a body wrap, we're about to go do it for the next month.
Yeah.
But manual cleaning in decontam is a step that can't be skipped. It is crucial to the decontamination process. You must go through the sink to get to the washer or get to the sonic. You can't just bring a tray in, take it out of the container, and take it directly to the sonic. When we bring home kind of the manual process, and it really is facility-based, right? What you do at your facility as far as manual cleaning and what you're putting into your washer. You know, be mindful of IFUs when you're processing. Can it be submerged? Can it not be submerged? Should it be exposed to an enzymatic? Should it be exposed to a bleach or an alcohol? When you're training, you're going to have 9,000 questions. Can I do this? Can I do that? Ask those questions. Take the time. I don't care if you're making people mad. Ask the question because it's going to save someone's life on the other end. You might damage a $50,000 camera because you didn't know it couldn't be submerged. You might ruin a robotic arm because you broke it. You know, you set something on top of it. So bringing home kind of the manual cleaning process is essential. It is the first step in our process outside of point of use cleaning. But when you get to decon, manual cleaning is our first step, right? Removing visible debris. And I think we've gotten away from the what behind the why in Decon. Instead of do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. Tell me why we're doing this so I understand.
Sure.
Because
that's an important leadership
principle. It is. It's important to understand the process because you're going to be expected to articulate it to a surveyor. They don't want to talk to me. They want to talk to you. So I feel like when we get into training in Decon, it can't be a 2-week thing. You're not even going to see every tray in your fleet in 2 weeks. It's got to be longer than that. It's got to be probably a month. Some people learn differently. Not everybody learns textbook. Some people are demonstration people. You show me and I understand. But, the importance of manual cleaning, you can't rush the steps. If the solution says soak it for 5 minutes, you probably soak it longer than 5 minutes while you're addressing the other instruments in the tray. But when people think 5 minutes, that's like an eternity in a healthcare worker's life, right? When you're soaking something, and I got 17 more trays that got soaked too.
Yeah, it definitely takes some logistics planning because if you've only got one basin going and you're just soaking every tray 5 minutes at a time, you're going to end up in a pretty big backlog. I'm curious, Arlene, in your, you said 26 years of doing this. Do you have any examples or stories of times where you discovered after the fact that something that should have been taken apart all along, maybe we've been watching it assembled and if that ended up having any kind of negative impacts?
I remember when I had just recently gotten certified, I was probably 6 years into my career. I was 5 in when I got certified. I got a Gamma tray, and it has a large reamer in it. It has a couple of pieces that screw onto the top of it. Well, I was a technician in prep, ungloved, and I took it apart, and all kinds of schmutz fell in my hands. You know how angry I was when I brought that tray back to Decontam. And I wanted to sterilize myself that day, but I was like, man, let me wash up to the elbow. I'm going to say the ABCs about 5 or 6 times. I'm going to maybe do some hand sanitizer after and wash again just for good measure. But you never know. You put a lot of trust in your decontamination team, right? Because you're ungloved in prep. You're hoping that everything that comes through that washer is clean, visibly, and that there isn't going to be something in there that harms you. So when you're in Decon, you really do need to take the time because you're feeding the other room with, work with instruments, with trays, and it takes the time it takes. If you have 6 people waiting for 6 trays in the washer, they're going to get a little antsy. You're going to get a little antsy. You're going to get backed up, but it takes the time it takes. So maybe we don't need 2 people in Decon and 6 in prep. Maybe we need 4 in prep and 3 in Decon.
You don't say.
3 4 in Decon and 3 in prep. Because if the bulk of the work is over here, then the bulk of the employees should be over here.
Right.
To get over there.
And unfortunately,
safety really is pivotal in Decon, right? There's a lot of sharp things. We're sticking our hands in trays. There could be suture. There could be tips of instruments, scissors. The danger in Decontam is real. And the risk for like a hazardous duty is very real in Decontam, even beyond PPE, right?
Yeah.
Being stuck, having to do those shots.
That's a big conversation for another day for sure. That implication around hazardous duty for decontamination and the types of risks that employees are dealing with and what implications that even has from a pay perspective. I know there's been a lot of interesting conversations around that, but
look at the way Decon
unfortunately, Decontam's not always set up to be able to accommodate a lot of extra hands in there. So we do have to get creative about how to make the workflow work.
Decon sinks now are now coming where they're almost contained. Used to be a sneeze guard. Now it's like a whole box.
Mm-hmm. Those are
pretty cool. What is that saying? That's where we're going in our industry, right? Is if there is a need to decontaminate in a box like that, here comes our hazardous duty pay.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. All right. So I want to circle back around to that employee training piece of it that you touched on, Arlene, and really kind of use this to help drive our conversation forward. That knowledge piece of what we're training our new technicians to do, of what comes apart and what doesn't come apart, is one of the hardest gaps to solve, because we clean so many thousands of instruments in that decontamination room. That gamma tray, when you talked about taking that apart and it was a yuck factor in assembly, I said, good job just remembering that tray in the department that I worked at that did a ton of ortho procedures. The only time I ever got written up in sterile processing was because of a gamma tray and failing to take apart those reamers. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So
until you get branded and written up, you're not an official SBA.
That's right. So I've got personal experience and knowledge with that tray in particular. And so, yeah, thank you for doing a thorough job in inspecting it, and obviously potentially saving a patient from dealing with infection related to that tray. So with all these gazillion things that we need to know how to take apart, what comes apart, what stays together going through the wash, what should preceptors and departments be doing to try to solve this knowledge gap for their new employees?
Now that we're kind of in a computer industry, you see computers widely in our departments now, to include at our Decon sinks. What a perfect way when training an employee to bring up the SOP for your facility and go step by step. Granted, I know that's not going to work in every decontam, right? I'm not, I understand. But when we're talking about training somebody correctly, that's really where you're supposed to be doing step by step. Hey, this is what our SOP says. It says do this, do this, do this, don't do this. But to bring home, show them. Show an employee you're training, observe me today, right? Tomorrow, I'm going to expect you to return a demonstration. I want you to be able to decontam trays, and I want you to be able to say, hey, can I take this apart? Because I remember when I was training, it didn't matter. If that joker came apart, it came apart in decontam, and I would, ask for forgiveness on prep side. Synthes was a great example, right? You would take apart the drill guide, and there's a spring in there, and then the spring comes up missing. But a lot of times people didn't know that there was even a spring in there because they never checked it. So it's things like that. If you don't know, you didn't know it. So it was a great educational moment when I had the gamma tray. I took it back to Decontam. Yeah, I was a little pissy, but it was hey, this comes apart. You have to take this off. It should not be sonicked this way because blood and stuff gets into the threads and yada, yada, yada. But it was a teachable moment. Now, I could have gone back there and cussed and fussed and whatever's, but I would have missed the moment.
Right. I appreciate too, Arlene, that you went two places, right? You said, hey, listen, it's 2020 something, and we've got computers nowadays, and computers can do some fantastic, amazing things, especially when they're integrated with both the IFU, but also the workflows that you're working out of, to your point. If you're at the sink and you've got transparency into what this device is, it's at the sink. How you got computers that have all the information that a technician may need at that stage. And then you also alluded to with the SOPs, and I'll just kind of confess here. I was in the sterile processing industry for a number of years before I even heard the term SOP. I think it was one of my peers that worked in the VA system, no surprise. And they're SOPs, SOPs, SOPs. I'm like, what is this SOP thing you keep talking about? Sounds important, but we're not doing SOPs over here. Now, it's like with everything else. We do all have standard operating procedures, whether or not we call them that or not, and whether or not they're structured the way that a good SOP should. But regardless, if all that's integrated to your answer, if you have the right tools, the right tech at the right time to identify this, and it's no longer just a memory kind of thing, like Bobby was asking, you got 1,000 instruments and you just have to remember which ones come apart and which ones don't. But then you also said something that I want to call out here. This has been one of the themes of the entire Beyond Clean show from the very beginning. And it's this concept of critical thinking and how you can train to be a critical thinker. and you should be training all of your new technicians to think critically, because at the end of the day, you can learn what kind of instruments look like they might come apart. Maybe you don't know. Maybe the IFU doesn't say this, or maybe this is an instrument that you didn't see in your first 2 weeks of training. But now that critical thinking stage kicks in, like you described, where you're like, well, this is a Synthes item. I know a lot of these Synthes items probably come apart or could come apart. Let me just see. And again, we're not asking anybody to be breaking open instruments if they're not like twisting easily or whatever else, right? So like you still got to use your common sense. That's the critical thinking category. But yeah, I think your answer there on all three of those is very, very important, that we need the tech, we need the training, but then at the end of the day, we still have to be thinking critically about what's in front of us, what the goal is for this manual cleaning stage. I just wanted to pause a little bit and really call that out.
Well, I think too, new training employees also are super afraid to stop the line, right? They don't want to be called out. They don't want to say, hey, somebody's doing it wrong. But normally it's our new fresh eye employees that find all our mistakes.
Yep. Yeah, because they don't know any better to keep quiet.
Exactly. Right? They're like, well, in training I was told this, but the SOP says this, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. But it's really those pivotal moments that make us better as an organization.
Right. And how many times do you have those new technicians that are going through the certification handbook, and then they come in the next day and they're like, I just read this in chapter 7 and it says we shouldn't be doing this. And everybody's looking around like, oh yeah, you're right. Busted.
We've kind of gotten away from the 3-sink concept. But that really is best practice in the industry. Well, some people don't have 3 sinks, right? Some small little surgery centers don't have 3 sinks, and they're like, man, I'm non-compliant. You do what you have to, you deal with the cards that you were dealt. Granted that, it goes according to your build. Great that you have 2 sinks, 2 basins. But moving forward, the future is we want a 3-bay sink. So
you're going to have to listen to the conversation with Jesse Lopez and Bobby on the sink conversation.
That's a huge point of contention for Jesse, the sink process. Yep. And I understand.
That's what I love about this industry, though, too. And, the title of your episode is The Great Disassembly Debate. But I think that's a great reminder, again, that many times, if it's disassembly, if it's sink, we come at, some of these recommendations or guidelines, textbook information. And, just in case anyone's confused, this is also very important. What's in your textbook is not necessarily a guideline. Just because it's in your textbook doesn't make it a guideline. The guidelines are separate. Likewise, IFUs are also not industry guidelines. Those are instrument specific or, manufacturer specific. And so there's all this nuance around there that just naturally creates debate. And we believe debate is good. And we like people on both sides of the debate. Go ahead. Give it to me.
So this came up recently with a question from the industry. We have flushing machines now, right? We don't see them in scope IFUs. So I was like, you're right. You don't see them in scope IFUs. I said, again, scope IFUs are essentially the manual. You're not going to have a flushing machine if you were in Afghanistan. You're going to have a syringe.
Are you saying we have to think critically, Arlene?
Right. Like, I think people are like, well, the IFU doesn't say we use a flush pump, but that doesn't mean you can't do better than the IFU. And I think people get really lost in that the IFU doesn't say you can do this. You're right. You can exceed the IFU. You can do better than the IFU. You can't go under the IFU.
Well, speaking of getting lost, you mentioned in the scenario earlier with like that Synthes drill guide. Yeah. That if you unscrew that little baby, boom, goes the spring. Then it goes crazy. But that's just one example of a lot of different things that can be disassembled. And then in the process of the manual cleaning or the automated cleaning, if they are disassembled, the likelihood of those little pieces getting lost just expand exponentially. What have you seen been best practice or most helpful for keeping our disassembled devices together in a way that when they come out on the clean side, they're easy to find. They're all still there so that you can put the puzzle pieces back together again.
We have little baskets. Trays now have baskets that sit right with them all the time. And they're small little wire baskets. You can put them in the Sonic. You can put them in the sterilizer. You can put them in the washer. You can soak them in the sink. But they stay unique with the tray for, like, some facilities disassemble stopcocks. So all of those pieces to the stopcock would go into this little basket so they're not flying around in the washer or what have you. And then they, would go to prep and essentially be assembled to make sure that they, the pieces fit together and then disassembled again. Some facilities do disassemble for sterilization. Some facilities assemble. It's really, again, goes according to your hospital policy. Even, too, we have stuff that we take apart for decontamination and then sterilize together because they're validated that way. I feel like that was a lot for us in our industry to say, hey, a laparoscopic instrument can be sterilized together. What? That was huge, really. Or maybe some of our new techs have never had to go to an OR and assemble a universal lap tray sterile because the technician didn't know how to assemble it. But they knew how to use it once it was assembled.
So one more step, Arlene, before we get out of kind of this dirty side scenario here. We've talked about, at the sink, okay, this is how we keep things together. I love the basket idea. Obviously, that's one of the more common practices out there to kind of keep them together, especially if you're going.
Baskets when we got away from those little T steeper things that, you put little nipples in, you squeeze it together, it's round. But it reminds me of like a tea dipper back in the day. But those really only stayed in Decon, right? Like they didn't travel with the tray. So now you have that problem when you get to the other side that now you don't have a holder. So very interesting how we've kind of progressed.
So before we get to the clean side, we've gone through the manual cleaning process. We've disassembled or rinsed, we brushed, we flushed, we've actuated, we ultrasonic if necessary. Now, before they go into the automated washer, what kind of loading advice would you give? Again, considering primarily that we may have disassembled items that we're putting in this tray that now we're washing and that we're loading into these washers. Is there anything that you would say definitely do or definitely don't do at that loading process?
One, I would certainly make sure that, your rocker arms are spinning. It's not hitting any of your pieces sticking out of your flash pans. Be mindful of, some people are washing robotic arms now. Be mindful that the arm is actually in the washer when it closes. That's happened a lot in the last couple of months. Everybody has these new racks in the washer and the washer closes and snap. But I feel like we do a lot to educate as far as how you should load your washers. I feel like a lot more of our washers are coming with thinner spaces, so you're only allowed to do a single tier tray. So that's why I said make sure your rocker arms are moving, because I feel like the space in our washer racks are getting smaller and smaller by the year because they're wanting people to follow the process of single layer in the washer. But, be mindful when you're putting things in the washer that are disassembled and small that could fly around. Maybe you need a screen to go over the top of your tray to prevent stuff from flying in the tray. Or, an empty flash pan is a good way to secure things while in the washer, an automated washer. 2, be mindful that you're not putting your instrument mats on the top. They're supposed to be on the bottom of our racks so it doesn't impede flow throughout the washer. But be mindful. Again, go back to critical thinking. If you think you could drop it in the room, then it's probably going to fly in our washers with, high impingement. And 2, when you have movable parts like that and they can move in your washer, there's a chance they could shatter your door. Or, harm somebody else, get stuck in a rack, and somebody goes to pull the tray out and gets cut. So, safety first.
Yeah,
worries about of what we do.
Worries about instruments getting lost or kicked out in the washer is certainly one thing that keep people from wanting to disassemble. It's why we call it the disassembly debate. Another one is efficiency, right? You get those multiple level orthopedic trays come in from your loaners, and people say, well, if we separated out these levels, it's going to take us, 4 hours to get these through our washer because we've just got the one washer. But but we can't choose to cut corners just because of that workflow constraint. It obviously is a patient safety issue if we can't have the trays ready on time, but that's a conversation to have as the tray's getting signed in or as the surgery is getting scheduled, not at like 2 a.m. before the 6 a.m. case and decide, well, we're just going to wash these improperly to make sure that we can have them ready. So we do need to disassemble them appropriately, meaning, have those levels separated on out. Arlene, as we are wrapping our conversation today, I want to close thinking about receiving these instruments on the clean side of the washer. So you've done your due diligence. You're that one technician in the department who's using that critical thinking and is taking apart every instrument, even if it's not supposed to be taken apart. What skills have you seen or methods have you seen to help communicate through the washers to the clean side that, hey, these pieces go together, or these 4 levels that I took out of this giant shoulder tray all go back into this one tray, so that it's not a puzzle disaster on the clean side?
Well, one, if it is a multi-tier tray, so the actual container, the layers go in, needs to be in the same washer as the levels that are being washed. Be mindful, right? Human nature, keep everything together. Like, if it's 5 levels, try to keep all 5 levels in the same washer with the actual container. 2, remember back in the day, we used to hold up those loaner sheets to the window and be like, hey, this is what's coming in, but it's a dirty piece of paper, so you can't have it. Thank God we have computers in Decon now, because we have Teams, we have email, we can send smoke signals. I'm joking. But I mean, communication, right? Because normally when you're in Decon and you're PPE'd up and you ain't got time for stopping and whatevers, but you sure can send a Teams message and say, hey, washer 2 is a turnover. Most of us have pass-through windows. Somebody will go to the pass-through window and say, hey, you had 2 washers for that one tray because there's so much stuff that I had to put it in 2 washers. But communicate, speak. I get it again. Thank God we've gotten away from the paper on the window. Here's your loaner sheet. Now you got to copy all your tape off of the window. There's a sheet stuck to the window so you can have it on the clean side because the paper didn't travel out of Decon. I think just, again, be mindful. Think about how the tray will be assembled on the clean side. Can't assemble the tray if I don't have all the parts. So that's pivotal. When you're loading your washer, make sure you have all the parts. If it's 6 or 5 levels, make sure all 5 levels can fit in that washer with the container. If it can't, then communicate. Hey, the container for those 5 levels is in washer 2 or washer 3, or hopefully you have washer 4. But again, be mindful of who is on the receiving end. Think of who is coming in contact after you.
I think that's good advice for every station that we have in sterile processing, is be thinking about the next guy. Like, what am I doing in this station to be mindful of how this tray is going to be received by the next person? Even in the assembly areas, you're wrapping your trays, trying to wrap it in a way so that it's easy to open aseptically in the OR, whether that means you add your extra little folds or whatever. Just be thinking about, how's this going to be received at the next station? How are the trays going to be used? That guiding principle in Decontam is really important, especially if you're going to go that extra mile and unscrew all the little knobs and screws and pull all the stopcocks apart. Like, we need to make sure that those pieces are able to be put together. And if that's not currently your practice, rather than just, be the obstinate technician who says, like, I'm going to be the one here about patient safety. Like, try to start a cultural movement with your leadership team that let's agree to a process together for the sake of patient safety, and convince people of that. And instead of just, make other people red in the face because you keep taking apart all the stopcocks. And we don't do that here, darn it.
You don't want to be in assembly after Arlene's been in Decontam, because you can guarantee.
Well, I think everybody's got one of those technicians, and you both love and hate to work after them because you know that their stuff's going to be clean, but there's definitely some career, inventive tendencies. I
think I've only gotten two trays sent back in my career, and I was mortified. Like, I was embarrassed that I had a dirty tray sent to the prep side and like carried it home with me that day. I was like, man, that could have been me.
Yeah, we should take it personally as we're thinking about that. We want to take pride
malicious,
in our work.
You know what I mean? It's not malicious. We don't say, hey, I'm going to send dirty trays to assembly and harm my coworker. But The reaction I got from the coworker, I really carried it home with me that day. I was like, wow, I need to slow down. I need to be mindful of what I'm doing. No, it was not malicious. I would not do that, send dirty instruments to the other side. So yeah, I really did carry it with me because it's important to me. My safety and my coworkers' safety is paramount in all aspects of what we do, not just in decon or prep or scopes or sterile storage. I mean, you can have a toe rolled over while you're walking through the OR, so you just never know.
You never know. Well, that's what it's all about, taking care of patients. Arlene, thanks for your insistence on patient safety throughout your career and even today, pushing that conversation forward in the industry at large and even today here on the podcast. I appreciate it. We did not cover everything that there is to cover around this topic of how do you get it inside all your technicians' brains, which things come apart. When they know which ones come apart, what's the agreed upon method to load them in the washer? When you load it in the washer, what's the agreed upon method to make sure the clean side knows how to unload it from the washer? A lot of tools available out there, a lot of different processes. So if you are thinking through one of these processes out there today for your department and would like to continue this conversation with Arlene, I'm sure she'd love to chat with you about it. Arlene, what would be the best way for people to get in touch with you if they wanted to talk about their decontamination workflow?
Certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. I feel like I'm always on social media. Come see me at conference this year. That'd be the best way to be in the room. But yeah, I'm relatively available. I'm pretty accessible. But yeah, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Arlene, thanks for joining us on the show today. That's going to do it for our conversation around decontamination workflows. Always good to have you in studio, get a couple of laughs together with you. It was nice talking with you.
Well, thank you guys again for having me. I thoroughly appreciate it and the importance of doing these industry podcasts. I certainly appreciate the opportunity.
All right, that was Arlene Bush, your HSPA president. Fun conversation about the process of disassembling surgical instruments. How do we make sure that that gamma nail tray doesn't end up full of tissue for the next patient? And man, that was a flashback for me, for sure. Took me right back into the moment. That feeling of kind of personal regret of taking it home with you, of a tray that you didn't take care of well in Decontam, or you didn't catch the one that somebody else didn't do well in Decontam in the assembly area. It sticks with you. So yeah, this is a massive conversation and one that we ought to take seriously, trying to figure out how do we get our Decontam technicians to know what comes apart. So yeah, it affected me today, Hank.
If you're looking at design wise too, right? If something can come apart, there is a reason, or maybe there's multiple reasons, but out of everything that could be dirty and stay dirty, it's almost always these devices that can be and should be disassembled in Decon, right? It's the rongeurs that you can take apart. It's the Synthes drill guides you can take apart. It's the gamma instruments you can take apart. And there's a reason that you can take them apart. It's because they're just not designed in a way to be cleaned if they are still assembled. But as we've talked about multiple times on this show, and you just mentioned again, just because they can be taken apart, just because it's in the IFU and just because you train a technician one time doesn't mean that all that information is being applied every instrument every time as they come through our process. And it just takes once. It takes one dirty instrument to make it through and make it back to the patient. And then you've got potentially catastrophic results. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is not one of those that we need to cross the T and dot the I and we need to be technical because it's right to be technical. No, it says if we don't do this, there is a high likelihood that risk is entering the system. And that's not okay. Nobody wants that because we all want to fight dirty every single instrument, every single time. So yeah, Bob, I mean, terrific conversation. As you said, though, in the outro, there's a lot more to discuss. There's a lot more to do.
Yeah, and we called this a debate today, Hank, and we really only gave one side of it. It's important for patient safety, but there are some real head scratchers about what should come apart. And those are conversations that we need to be having out in the industry, whether that is through social media conversations or at your local chapter. Find some other users who are struggling with that, trying to find creative ways to deal with it. I remember a particular ENT biopsy forcep that we discovered many years down the road that all along we were supposed to be taking them apart, but they were so dang delicate that when we started taking them apart, our repair budget just started flying because we were breaking them like crazy. So part of this conversation is figuring out, how do we do it safely? How do we protect these devices that are being disassembled so that they make it to the other side without being broken? Big conversation to have. But that's going to do it for today's episode. It was a great one to be talking about planet decontamination. We're not done yet. We look forward to talking with you again next week as we keep exploring this planet. But until then, until we talk to you next time, we'll leave you as we always do here at Beyond Clean. Keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.